Happiness is beautiful, it's a kind reality. Happiness is the highest good, happiness is free. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.
Welcome to the Happiness Show. This is Lionel Ketchian, and I'm happy because I'm here with George Ortega, and we're here to talk about happiness because happiness is, always has been, and always will be the point of it all. Today, we're going to be talking about happiness as an obligation. Don't go away, because this is going to get good. George, how do we keep our listeners interested to this one?
All right. Well, I mean, a lot of times, we basically think of happiness as something that, like, you know, if we're lucky, we have it. If we're very lucky, we have a lot of it. And we sometimes think that we're just passive victims. But this is actually an idea I first read in a book by Rabbi Zelig Pliskin, who wrote a book called Gateway to Happiness. I think he wrote it back in 1983.
Right.
And I think he drew this this statement, this philosophy, from religious sources. It's probably also, though, in Greek sources. And it makes a lot of sense. The idea is that we have obligations to ourselves and to the world, and one of the obligations is happiness. For example, to ourselves, there is a body of research coming out, a growing body that demonstrates that as we become happier, we become healthier, we become more productive, physically healthier, more economically productive, our friendships become stronger, more meaningful. So basically, in a sense, happiness is a catalyst for becoming a more successful person, not just for ourselves, but for others. But again, for ourselves, we have an obligation to ourselves to be very happy because we owe it to ourselves. It's like we're not martyrs. I think the greatest obligation I think we have to ourselves is our own happiness. Mm-hmm. I think it's certainly an obligation.
Well, it's very interesting when we ask ourselves the question, what do we feel like when we're unhappy? And that's an interesting question because it's at the standpoint that we're unhappy that we can truly connect more with happiness. In fact, I'm going to make this statement. It's more about giving up on happiness than it is even about experiencing happiness, because every time you become unhappy, you actually move away from happiness. If you were at this point where, at least, let's say you're not happy, you're not unhappy, certainly being unhappy, suffering, is the slope. And the trouble with unhappiness, or even suffering, is that it leads to all of the, let's call them, bad things. Anger, violence, feelings of hopelessness, feeling of, always being in a bitter state, taking offense at everything. This is the problem, and really why you're saying that happiness is an obligation, because if you don't give it to yourself first, you suffer. It's very simple. You end up starting to suffer, and you see no way out, because when you're in a state of unhappiness, there is no way out. You can't. The lights are out. You can't see.
Yeah, and another reason why it's such an obligation to ourselves is because, like, we're raised in a very religious tradition of the Judeo-Christian culture. That's what permeates this country, and other religions basically form and influence greatly the other cultures. And so much of our conditioning, much of our heritage is about goodness. The religious laws, the civil laws, and then you have to consider Aristotle's statement that happiness is the highest good. Because obviously happiness is the point of all goodness. Why would it make sense to be good in any way except for the influence that goodness has on our own personal happiness and on the happiness of those around us? So then the conclusion that we have to reach is that if we really truly want to be as good as we cannot be that unless we're also very happy. Happiness, because otherwise we can be a martyr. We can be doing good things for other people, and yes, certain people have done that. I don't think Mother Teresa was a very happy person, yet her work allowed a lot of other people to be much happier, her sacrifice. But, I don't think that's necessary. I think that one can give a lot to the world, be very good, while also expressing this highest goodness by being very happy oneself.
It's interesting you bring up, was Mother Teresa happy? I always think she was. Maybe she didn't have a smile on her face, but we don't know. It's hard to measure happiness. And I don't always measure it with a smile, although that's, because a smile is not happiness. It is an expression of happiness. I think how you feel about yourself and connect with others is part of it. And boy, she really connected with others. So I get the feeling she was happy.
Well, yeah, I don't know. This is like, I remember reading some statements that she made that her life really wasn't about her happiness in a way. It's kind of like along the religious tradition of martyrdom. There are a lot of religious figures throughout history that have, it goes beyond history. It goes to politics and all. There's a lot of soldiers that have given their lives to greater causes, freedom, liberty and all. And so...
Well, George, I'm not familiar with the writing, but I'm wondering, did it actually say she wasn't she wasn't that attached to her happiness, or was it that she wasn't that involved with herself?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact comment, but
because my feelings about her is that she found herself in others, which is I think enlightenment. I think that's true, and also helping others. But she was about eliminating pain and suffering, which is, in my book, is if she could do the work of eliminating pain and suffering, then that's happiness. If not, then she was a catalyst for happiness. Yeah,
well, that's what I mean. Her efforts made the lives of millions of people much happier than they would have been otherwise. Her compassion, her caring, her work.
Yes, right.
Instrumental.
Right. Yeah, because there were people who, whatever their ailments were, when they were in her midst, maybe touched by her or just near her, they were being helped. In fact, they even if they still suffered pain or affliction, just the fact that a human being was there to care for them or show their care for them was a big, big thing for them. And I think it alleviated a lot of suffering. I really do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, and actually now, as we're on the theme of happiness in other people, let's go to that point that happiness isn't just an obligation to oneself and to goodness. It's also, we have an obligation to be happy for the sake of our friends and our family.
But ourselves first is what I say.
Yeah, in a sense, because a lot of times we can't give happiness that we don't have.
Yeah.
But
or you're trying to change them without having first had the influence on yourself.
Well, here's the thing. Here's basically, we have to be happy for our friends' sake because feelings are so contagious. Because our level of happiness or unhappiness is invariably going to affect everyone around us. If we're happy people, if we're a happy person, we're going to raise children that are happier. Our spouse is going to be happier. Our friends are going to be happier. We're going to be expressing that, in so many ways. And if we're less happy, we're going to be, generally when we're less happy, we're going to be expressing that with thoughts. We're going to be complaining. We're going to be wishing we had what we don't, and just basically having a more negative state of mind. And we express those things in conversation all the time, and it can't help but be communicated. So that's why it's such a great obligation, not just to ourselves, but to our friends and family, for us to be as happy as possible so that we can facilitate their happiness as much as possible.
Well, I think you're 100% right about that, George. I agree 100%. I think the only thing that we need to add to that formula is, again, when we're happy for ourselves, we understand that at times we may be there may be a situation where we, let's say, fall out of happiness, and then we can examine our unhappiness and not keep feeling that, oh, I have to do this for others, although it might aid us in understanding the value of it. But I think we have to be whole in ourselves and embrace our unhappiness at times, our suffering, our pain. I think we need to incorporate that, look at it, and not run away from that. And if at those times we don't appear happy to our friends and family, so be it. But then we can come back to understanding, again, the value of happiness and go back towards it. Because you really raise a good point. There's a value there for the world, and if we don't show it to them, we're sort of not embracing the best we can do for ourselves and our fellow man.
Yeah, and the reason I highlight it I give it so much importance is, like, for example, many parents feel that they're giving their children everything. They're giving them so much financial assistance, their education, so many material goods, and they think, wow, I'm such a great parent. Meantime, their kids maybe aren't very happy, and a lot of times they don't make the connection. You know, they have sacrificed, they haven't worked that much on their happiness, and they're thinking that they could assure their children's happiness without their being happy. That doesn't work that way. If a child is in a household, a family, where the parents are just sacrificing themselves to make more and more money, be more and more successful, do this and that, for the sake of the kids even, and they lose their happiness that way, that is not going to help the kids become happier.
Yeah, excellent points. And the other thing about happiness is, and I think you raise a good point, not only for the parents, not only for the children in a family, but for your mate as well. Because when you're not happy, or you don't give happiness to your husband or wife or mate, what happens is you end up splitting, and then when there's children, they end up suffering as a result of it. So happiness addresses that concern as well. So it comes back to, what is happiness? Happiness can be understanding yourself so well that you spend valuable time, as it's been referred to, quality time, listening to the other person. When you speak, I try to give you, I try to actively listen to you. I try to really stop thinking. I try to actually almost step into you. And then I try to get back out again, and just in time for me to say something. But I'm kind of kidding with that. But I mean it. I think when our mate speaks, we don't listen enough. You know, it's like, what did you say? I wasn't listening. That means, whatever it means, I'm not going to give it a label, but there are better ways to appreciate oneself. And what is happiness but appreciation? So when you listen to a person speaking, when you give them your full attention, you actually begin to appreciate them. You actually can derive joy even if you don't agree with what they're saying. Oh, yeah. You've connected with the other human being, and that's not happening generally lately.
Yeah. Well, again, we just did a show on happiness and education. I think we kind of pretty much explored why that doesn't happen nearly as much as it can. Being that, like, our children are taught everything under the sun for 12 years, but how to get along with each other and enjoy life.
Or themselves, for that matter.
Oh yeah. Let's explore, though, the idea of happiness being an obligation, not just to ourselves, not just to goodness and other people, but also to our work. Okay.
Well, you know, I made the analogy the last time we were talking that regards to education, that a lot of people started off in the mailroom but ended up as the president of the company, and even without a good education. And in some cases, they didn't even know how to read or write even when they arrived in those positions, because they had other people doing that job, that function for them. But they had the clarity of mind to understand their purpose, and I think to be happy and to stick to what they had to accomplish. But in work, if we're not happy, what good is work? What good is the work we do? And you know, and I think what's happened in America, for the most part, is that the pay for jobs has gone up. But are we just working for the money? When we do that, where's the satisfaction level? We don't derive happiness as a result of payment. We derive happiness from a whole bunch of other things, and one of which is by understanding happiness, valuing it, and practicing it. And if we don't do it at work, we're not paying ourselves enough to do the work.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, because a lot of times we feel that the compensation for our work is only financial. We get a paycheck and that's it. You know, that's all we're supposed to get. But I mean, we're spending 8 hours a day, 5 days a week working, many of us. And so that's a substantial portion of our life. So we've got to, as an obligation to ourselves, you know, be sure that we're happy while we're working. But I mean, also, like, how our happiness is an obligation to our work is it's being understood more and more clearly by recent research. Again, this body of research is demonstrating that as people become happier, they become more creative, they're more energetic, they're more cooperative. They they earn more income. They're just these skills, these specific work-related skills that are enhanced by happiness. And so that's the reason why, if we want to really be good at our jobs for our own sake, for the sake of our family, for the sake of our coworkers, then it's an important ingredient for us to maintain that connection with happiness, because to the extent we do that, the quality of our work is going to improve, and the quality of our relationships at work will improve.
That's very true. And I would even venture out so far as to say that the people who make more money, not always, but generally, are happy. Not always, because sometimes if that's your only purpose, you're going to achieve it, but at the lack of something else. But in sports, for example, sports is a good indication that I believe that some of the greatest athletes we've ever had and experienced are people who are actually happy, because it's happiness that allows them to excel. And when you're not happy, you're off for that day. And when you're off for the day, you're not playing your best game. I think this is true in everything, whether it's skiing, baseball, being a surfer. I've seen and read comments from people saying, when I swung and hit that home run, I felt good all day, and I knew I was going to do well. And that kind of atmosphere breeds success, and I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just it's the mood. Our brains work better when we're in a happy state of mind. When we're happy, I mean, the less stress, the less displeasure we're feeling, the better our minds are working, and that will reflect itself in our work and throughout whatever we do. Another obligation I think we can assume, because these are obligations that we assume that will enhance our life and make us better people and make the lives of those around us much better and happier. This is a very religious country. This is one of the most religious, I think we're far more religious than most European countries. And so God is important to us in general. So that the person that I referred to before, Rabbi Zelig Pliskin, who wrote that book, Gateway to Happiness, also expresses this idea in this book, that we have an obligation to God to be very happy. And the reasoning is this. God has bestowed us life, bestowed us, every blessing that we have comes from God. Our food, our clothing, our shelter, our friends, everything we have. And when and basically the idea is that what He's given us is enough it should be enough to have us be very happy. These blessings, if we recognize and appreciate them and feel gratitude for them, are more than enough for us to feel happy lives. So that to whatever extent we're unhappy, we're kind of like saying to God, no, this isn't enough. We're not satisfied with all you've given us. We want more. And that's kind of like as if you're a parent and you're giving your kids all these things, all these these blessings, and they're not happy. They want more and more. It's not a morally right thing to do. It's not ethical. It's not expressing gratitude. So basically, our feeling happy, very happy, is really probably the best way to express gratitude toward God for the many blessings that He gives us.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think that maybe that's where the idea came in that money can't buy happiness, as well as saying that more can't buy happiness, because it can't. If it's not appreciated and it's in the moment, then it's nowhere. And you've given the one side of religion, and I guess the predominant other side is the Christian end of it. And I know I've read one book on happiness that's been Christian oriented, and it's the monks of New Skeet up near the Canadian border on the New York side, New York State, have a book called In the Spirit of Happiness. And in it, there's a little part that goes, God has got to be the happiest being in the universe. And so we should emulate God by being happy, because how can you have an unhappy God? It would be like having an unhappy slave master or an unhappy boss, and none of us like an unhappy boss. So God's given us free will. He's given us the power of choice. And what do we do with it? Do we choose happiness? Do we choose misery? Is it make sense that we can overcome our victimization, or feel that our suffering could be overcome by simply turning to happiness? I mean, these are the questions that the obligation raises. And so if we suffer less, there's less violence in the world, because at the root of violence is really suffering and want and desire and fear, and that's what creates unhappiness. In fact, that's what unhappiness is. And until we change our way of thinking to feel better about ourselves, to feel, hey, we've got everything. I mean, I'm blessed. I've got what I've got, and that's great. It may not be more and it may not be less than the other person, but whatever it is I've got something. And even if it's somebody who feels that, they've only got a certain amount of time left, when they really connect with what the time they have left, they realize that they're going to make the best out of that time. They're going to live it happily. They're going to cherish every moment. And who knows what happens? Who knows how long they live and if they overcome the illness? But at least they and in fact, I've talked to many, many, many people who have overcome, a sentence of death on an illness. It's an incredible thing. We never know, but living in the moment, embracing happiness, can be the most powerful thing in our life. And that's why, as an obligation, I almost hate that word, but it's an interesting word, because it's more than an obligation. It's your right. Yet we don't exercise the right.
Yeah. We come into this world, we're in the modern world now, and we have many blessings that were paid for by people who lived before us. Mm-hmm. Our freedom, our technology, our way of life, our laws, everything, our whole society. Many people fought wars. Many people worked very hard to create the kind of world that gives us so many opportunities for happiness. And so to a great extent, we owe our present happiness to the efforts of those who came before us. And so this leads to a kind of an obligation we have toward the future. The idea is that just as those who came before us created a world that makes it easier for us to become happier, we, I think, have an obligation to do that for those who will come after us. And the reason happiness is so important in this regard is that when we're in a state of unhappiness, we're in a state of taking. We're in a state where we're thinking to ourselves, I don't have enough, I'm not satisfied, I need more. So that will lead to actions that reflect that feeling, and lead to actions that aren't about giving, but are about taking, about trying to receive what we feel we need. And naturally, if we're in that state, we're not going to have the frame of mind, the motivation to be in that giving state. Conversely, as we become happier, as we feel better and better, our needs are satisfied, our wants are satisfied. We just feel that we feel so satisfied, so happy, that we want to give. That's a natural result of becoming very happy, and we can shape a much pleasanter world, much more pleasant world for our children and our grandchildren. So just, we do have an obligation to the future because we've benefited from the past. And just it's very clear that our happiness can really help us fulfill that obligation much more productively and much more effectively.
George, that's an excellent run through history, and I think you're 100% right about that, the history of man, although it's been laced with some negativity, has basically given us our freedom, especially here in America, and it's given us the right to be happy. It's shown us the value. Yet, what do we do with that? Do we practice it? Do we embrace that? There'll always be uncertainty. I think this is an important concept. If we're looking for 100% guarantee in anything, it's never going to happen. And that's one of the reasons that if you're waiting for perfection, guarantee, certainty, and then you'll be happy, guess what? There's no guarantees, there's no perfection, it's only uncertainty. So happiness in spite of uncertainty is the reason happiness can exist, because if it wasn't for uncertainty, I don't think there'd be happiness. There'd be no free will, there'd be no choice. And so we won't get into that. But what I will say is that happiness, as you say, George, has been through the long annals of history, and people who have fought and died for it, in a sense, they've given us the right to choose that. And are we choosing it? I mean, it's as simple as that. And that is true, I think, from the standpoint that it is an obligation. But again, if we don't value it, if we don't understand it, how can we choose it? So how can we even understand it? We're not even talking about it until we understand it. And otherwise we're talking about something that's a word and has no meaning for people.
Sure, and actually we're going to do a show. We introduced the concept of what happiness is in our first show together, and we're going to actually devote an entire show to that because it's so important. The other part, though, is like, as we're talking about happiness and obligation, a lot of experiments now are demonstrating that as we feel more gratitude, we become happier. And in a sense, gratitude is kind of a manifestation of happiness. It's like gratitude is kind of that expression that demonstrates that we're aware of our blessings, not just aware of them, that we're thankful for them, that we appreciate them, and that's a form of happiness that we're feeling. That's a very strong form of happiness. So that, in a sense, in terms of our obligation to feel happy and to be good, I think that we have an obligation to feel grateful just for everything. And it's very ironic because, like, fulfilling that obligation is a means to becoming happier. It's kind of like the obligation just creating the reality that's for our benefit. We're not doing something because we have to, because it's like, you know, the morally right thing to do. We're doing it also because it's the best way for us to feel much happier.
Mm-hmm. George, let me ask you a question. How much of our body contains water? What percentage do you happen to know?
I don't know, I think what is it, 97%?
Yeah, something like that, right? Well, I would make an analogy that what water is to the body, gratitude is to happiness. It is 97% of it. It is the life force of happiness. You cannot be grateful and unhappy, and so that means that the world is going along and along, and it's just not grateful. It's not seeing what it has, what is before it. So it's a good point. I hope that analogy makes some people understand that gratefulness is the key to happiness. It's part of it. And George, that's just about it. Thank you. It was a great show. I think obligation is important, but we have an obligation. We have an obligation to sign off and let people know they can join us again next week. That's about all the time we have left for today, but it's not all the time we have for happiness. That continues. Thanks for watching. In the future, we're going to explore other topics designed to help us better enjoy life, be good, think well, and you have an obligation to feel very happy. And I hope you'll join us again next week on the Happiness Zone. Take care. Stay well.
Happiness is powerful. It's our underlying need. Happiness is why we live each day. Happiness is destiny. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.